My sister told me to do it. Sarah Raven told me to do it. And now Linda Varta has told me to do it. So I think it's time I got on and did it. Now, if you're a novice gardener like me, or perhaps someone with more experience who is willing to share that expertise in the comments, I would love it if you would consider subscribing to my channel. All you need to do is to hit the button marked subscribe, and that means next time you open the YouTube app on your phone, your tablet or your computer, one of my videos will be waiting for you. And my plan for today? Well, it involves a notepad, a pen and a tape measure. I need to actually work out how big my cutting garden plot is, and to also mark on where my plants are. And that way I'll be able to plan my garden more effectively. Now, I have always estimated that my cutting plot is approximately 2 to 3 metres wide and 10 metres long. So today we'll finally find out whether that's true. This job would be so much easier if I had someone else to hold the end of the tape measure, but I'm going to struggle on and just work with approximate measurements, being as accurate as I can. I have managed to find a reasonably long tape measure which extends out to 8 metres. I'm going to make a rough note of the measurements, sketching out as I go, and hopefully then I'll be able to transfer that to my Linda Varta 5-year garden journal. So what I have done is I'm trying to limit the amount of gardening books I buy. I know with my flower arranging books, every time a new book comes out, I want it because it looks beautiful. But I'm trying to restrict myself to just 3 books at the moment. And I think the trick is to make sure you actually read the books, to make sure you take the advice in hand. So I got the Garden Flower Expert, which I use for identifying flowers and finding out a bit more about it. I've got the Sarah Raven Cutting Garden Journal, and then for my birthday I was given the Linda Varta Garden Journal. I don't know if you watch Linda Varta's channel here on YouTube, it's fantastic. So I'll leave a link to the 3 books I use and also to Linda Varta's channel in the description underneath this video. Have a guess in the comments how long you think my garden plot is. I was pretty darned accurate though in terms of the width. So here are my notes, and I'm hoping to be able to transfer those into the garden design pages that Linda has left blank in her journal. I'm going to use pencil. I'm just a bit worried if I commit to ink I'm going to make a mistake. So my garden plot is 12.5 metres long. I'm allowing 2 centimetres per metre. And I've worked out the widths, and as you can see I've got a nice sinuous curve, and that's the line of the garden path. And then I've also measured out where my main plantings are. So on the side boundary I've got my lilac tree, the bay, the pear tree, the field maple, and then the side wall of our old chicken shed where we've got our bench. And I want to remember where I've planted my spring flowers, my drifts of the daffodils and the tulips, in order that I don't overplant those beds. During the summer months, I don't have any intention of lifting my tulip bulbs. I struggled to get them in. The physical exertion of digging, making sure the temperatures were cool enough for the bulbs, making sure I was storing my bulbs in the correct temperature before I planted them. It was just all too much of a faff. So I'm going to keep my bulbs in the ground. We'll wait and see whether that was a good decision to make or not. But I've been enjoying the fruits of my labours and cutting my tulips to enjoy indoors. I will say with the daffodils, I have hardly got any daffodils at all. They all seem to have either been eaten by the slugs, I guess, or to have come up blind. But I've had quite a nice succession of my darker tulips here. Originally I put these in a vase with my coloured tulips as well, but I decided they'd look much more striking separated. So these lovely dark tulips, and I would say probably they were worth the effort of planting them all in the autumn months. I'm just certainly not a digger. And then I've also got my more vibrant coloured tulips. These were the same pack, so it included the bright yellows, the purples, and a more of a parrot tulip. This pinky tulip with a green tinge, which is pretty much gone over, is sort of planted my second flush of tulips. I think there's 4 different varieties that had green flash on them, so I expect I'll be picking those from next week to bring indoors to enjoy. Now, although I have sketched out my garden in the garden design pages of Linda Varta's journal, I'm not actually designing my garden. I'm using that plan more as a catalogue of what I've got. And what I've got too much of is ground cover. The idea for my garden is a cutting garden. I'm growing for height. So it's totally different on my side of the garden compared to my husband, who wants lots of ground cover so he doesn't have to weed. And what I'm getting now is too much ground cover. This is the native geranium. This particular variety has a very pale pink flower, a really insignificant flower. So as cruel as it looks, I'm going to be digging up these clumps of native geranium. I'll have to think about doing that for my self-sown forget-me-nots as well. Some of the geraniums I will keep, and you'll see a clip of that towards the end of the video. It's got a different leaf shape so I can identify it, and it has a much more intense sort of fuchsia pink to it. And although I don't particularly like that as a variety either, it's got a much more significant flower. It actually looks quite nice picked and casually arranged in a sort of jam jar equivalent of my kitchen windowsill. I'm quite amazed here looking at the footage back how dry our soil is. We seem to have had a really, really wet spring. It just goes to show that even if you think your soils are moist, that it can be quite deceptive. I've got lots of ivy there growing up over the trunk of my lilac tree, so it's starting to not self-seed. What does it do? It's lying on the floor on the earth, and then it's starting to root. That's the word I'm looking for. It's starting to root, so that's why I was clawing back at it, trying to just keep everything under control. So amongst my ground cover, the geraniums, I've found the pot, one of the pots I planted up last year. That one had Viburnum bonariensis. I still can't say that, although I have now written it in my garden journal. I hope by writing it and repeatedly saying it, these plant names should eventually trip off my tongue. I must say I'm quite pleased with the fact that my digging out skills seem to be better than my digging in skills, although perhaps I've just got the right tool for the job here with my husband's garden fork. I am forever finding lots of remnants of brick and paving stone. So this part of the garden, if you're new to my garden, originally had outbuildings on it. We had a tortoise enclosure, a rabbit hutch, an aviary, and a chicken shed and run. So where I come across the paving stones and bricks, I'm putting them onto my flower beds in order to create little stepping stone paths, because the beds are quite wide, between 2.5 and 3.5 metres, I can accurately tell you. I don't want to be tramping on the soil because I'm trying to do the no-dig method of gardening, so I don't want to be compacting my soils. So having a good old clear out, and now I've sort of created quite a large gap here. I didn't realise that the geranium there was taking up so much space. So having cast out my pot of verbena, I'm now going to actually put it in the soil. I hadn't planned to do this right now because I've got several pots that I need to think about putting into the flower beds. Taking a break here just to look at this little caterpillar. Is that responsible for munching its way through my daffodils? Let me know in the comments, especially let me know if you can identify what butterfly that's going to turn into. So I've got here a juga, and as I plant this out, I'm thinking I should have thought about this more carefully, because having looked up a juga afterwards, of course it needs shaded, moist soil. I've planted it in full sunlight in what is quite dry soil, but perhaps with the verbena growing up, that might create shade and keep it alive. To be honest, I'm not really bothered about this if it dies. When I bought this plant from somebody's doorstep when I was at charity shops in Sandwich, it was misnamed, and I thought I was buying something tall. So for me, this is a bit of ground cover. It's not going to grow tall. No, it'd be nice if it survived, but it isn't really a plant that I had on my shopping list. It's elephant ears, or the begonia, next up for planting. And again, I don't really like begonia. It's got those huge elephant ears and quite a spindly spike of a pink flower, which looks like a poor man's hyacinth. And I did think if I was going to plant the begonia out, I would have it down the side of the garden next to my neighbour's fence. It's almost like a little bit of a no man's land where each neighbour has inset the boundary fence a little bit, and I thought I could sort of hide some of the concrete along that side there, and I've ended up planting it sort of in a really visible place. So again, I'm not bothered if this doesn't survive. We've got plenty of it in the front garden for those very rare occasions when I need a round hand-sized leaf. So on with the verbena, and digging a nice deep hole here. And what you'll see me do later, I do water the plants in, and then I've sought to protect or support the verbena a little bit. It's going to grow quite tall, so it's one of those plants that you see, when you visit a stately home, it's wafting in the breeze. But I'm thinking, knowing my luck, I'll get less waft and more spillage. So I've noticed that my husband uses upturned hanging baskets to support or protect some of his flowers. And I had been to a flower arranging workshop, and you'll recognise this hanging basket if you've been to my Zoom flower club. If you're a member of my YouTube membership group, you get free access to my monthly online flower arranging club, and I showed you this piece. It inspired another piece that I made, and I thought perhaps by putting that over the top of the plant, it means I make use of something that I didn't really have a use for indoors, and the verbena would be able to grow through that the mesh and be supported a little bit. We'll have to see how that happens. Anyway, I'm now back in the flower bed, standing between the lilac and the bay tree. We have a rambling rose and a climbing rose in this location, and I noticed that the tendrils, when I was looking for my kitchen sink, I could see the tendrils of the rose sort of growing the wrong way, so I've just fed them all back a little bit, and some of them I've wound horizontally through the bay tree, and I'm hoping that will encourage more upwards growth, some vertical shoots. We'll have to wait and see. So clearing out a little bit more. I'm not attempting to clear everything from the bed. I'm just concentrating on this first section so that I can feel I've achieved something in the 20 minutes, half an hour that I had spare after my exercise class. One thing I do need to plant out is this hydrangea. I planted it into this metal bucket. It had lovely cone-shaped flowers, which I've got indoors, which I dried. But I'm just wondering, what has happened to the plant. Obviously some forget-me-nots have decided to self-seed, and I'm just hoping there's a bit of life left in the plant, and that's on my job list of things to do in the following weeks, is to plant that out into the garden. I'm just having a look at this beautiful lilac as well. Our lilac tree constantly seems to be on the point of dying, but every year it does sprout out a few stems. These stems are coming direct out from the trunk, and what I was making sure I was doing, that when I plopped the head back, I've actually moved it slightly so I can see it from the kitchen windowsill when I do the washing up, so it's not hidden. So a little bit of an overview here. I've picked my dark stem tulips and my taller vibrant ones, and then, like all gardening jobs, you have to go to the compost heap. So I'm tumbling the hydrangea into the compost heap. It's all a bit rickety, things are falling apart, but this part of the garden is hidden, so you don't get a general view of it. And I've got this really heavy compost basket, which my husband can't understand why I've got it. And I say, because it looks beautiful, and I can just casually leave it out amongst the flowers, and it sort of looks purposeful instead of having something plastic out there. Taking a moment or two to admire my handiwork. You can see here I've got quite a lot of the Arum Italicum pictum, those marbled leaves that flower arrangers love because they always make your spring flower arrangements look so interesting. This is my daffodil patch, which came to nothing really. My stinking hellebores, which got new growth, which aren't flowering. Some more hellebores in the background there. And then as we go up to the field maple stem on the right and the pear tree with the ladder leaning against it on the left, there's some plantings against the fence there, so that'll help disguise the fence in the coming years. And these are the tulips, the one with the green tinged sides, which I'll be picking and taking indoors next week. A big clump here of ragwort. It is loved by the cinema moth and caterpillars, so it's a bit of wildlife interest there. This bare patch was where I had my dahlias, which presumably rotted in the soil. So I think perhaps this summer I might think about planting those in tubs. And then an aerial view of that hanging basket. Got an awful lot of cable ties attaching that corner stems on there. I think probably I'll have to cut them off and throw them away before they end up in the soil. And there is the native geranium that I am keeping. Can you see it's got a slightly larger and deeper coloured flower. And here's the dog keeping me company and checking up on my progress. Maggie? Hello. Thank you so much for joining me in the garden today and keeping me company. I've got a few more jobs I need to be thinking about. Number one is keeping down the new weed growth. My husband suggested I need to get the garden hoe out and daily be going over and starting to prepare my seed beds for where I want to do my direct sowing of my seeds. I also need to plant out my tubs, decanting what I planted last year into my flower beds, and I've bought myself 3 campanula flowers, so I need to gauge the right time for planting those into the garden, making sure the slugs don't eat them.